Welcome back. Today we are bringing you this video from the Cunard Queen Elizabeth. I'm here with my good friend Abe, who has joined me on this cruise, and we are on a 10-night Alaska cruise. This is a round-trip cruise starting from Vancouver and ending back in Vancouver, and we will have visited Ketchikan, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, Juneau, Skagway, Glacier Bay, Victoria, and then back to Vancouver.
Everything in this video is our honest opinion, so you take it as you will, but this is our honest review compared to other videos that seem to sugarcoat certain sections, so take it as you will.
Yep, and please go ahead and enjoy the video. Let us know if there's any feedback or anything else that you would like us to do or see in the future. So let's get right into it. I'll start with what we have as our general list of the ship itself and what we liked and what we did not like. So for starters, it's a beautiful ship. Yeah. I think you'd agree it's very nice, like old money feel. Like you can see in this library, I mean, even this setting is a really nice, like classic setting, and that same theme flows throughout the rest of the ship.
I must agree with that. I think the best thing about this ship is the furniture, just the overall construction of the ship. Very traditional look, makes you feel like you were a part of the Titanic back in the day, and especially with all the amenities involved with the ship as well.
Definitely like the Titanic before it sank. So
yeah.
Other than that, I think we're pretty good. It's a nice feel. Going on with that same point, the ship as a whole is really clean. They do a really good job in the public areas, cleaning everything up. The bar areas and that, if people leave the tables, they clean that out real nice and well. Same with the restrooms. A lot of the time, if you walk in the restroom throughout the day, they have people that clean it a whole lot, and like you can tell because they always fold like a triangle on the toilet paper or things like that, so you can just tell that the ship itself is very well kept.
Yeah. Staff definitely does do a good job of upkeeping the ship, whether it's here in the library or at a bar seat, wherever you choose to stay.
Yeah. Now, when we go on to our next point, which is more of like the relaxation and that, like as far as the spacing on the upper decks, we are on an Alaska cruise, which does help because there's not that much need for people to be outside and like sunbathe in that, but there was still plenty of outside spacing. And the nice part is on this trip is the pools are heated. So even if it's cold outside, you can still enjoy some time in a swimming pool with it being, I think the last one I saw was around 26 degrees Celsius. That's probably like 75-ish to 78 in Fahrenheit. So it is a good temperature for a heated pool. The other nice thing is on deck 3 of the ship, they have a promenade deck, which is like a track, and that wraps the whole way around the ship. So you don't get all the way to the front, but you can see at the back of the ship and walk a full loop around. So that's really nice, especially, again, we are in Alaska, so on the days where it may be a bit rainy, or if you're looking at things, you can have that sheltered area, but still get a full view around the ship.
Yeah. One thing I did notice, they did have these clear glass walls in some parts, especially the parts of the ship where it seemed that wind would hit it the most, where it adds basically a barricade, that way the wind doesn't affect you too much. So if you're really sensitive to wind, you could stay around there, that way it absorbs the blow of the wind for you.
Yeah, and that's a lot more on the upper decks. On the lower deck, on deck 3, wrapping around, there isn't any of that glass, but on the upper decks, your deck 9 and 10, especially at the front of the ship, like you mentioned, there is that glass. It's really good for the wind, but do keep in mind if you're trying to use binoculars or camera, it may affect that, so it's not the best viewing for if you're trying to look through a camera or binoculars. The other nice part that we did enjoy on this trip specifically is in our scenic cruising areas, they did open up the front section of the ship. So they had decks 5 and 6 where you could go right up in the front of the ship, which is normally reserved for crew only. Those areas were opened up for passengers during the scenic cruising time.
Yeah, if you do decide to do that, make sure you definitely go earlier, as they are very popular spots, especially when it comes time to seeing glaciers or just mountains and scenic views.
Yeah, they were definitely very busy. We personally ended up spending more time at the back of the ship, And it worked out really well because the captain and the navigation crew did a really good job of making sure in those scenic areas that they, spun the ship around, that you would have good viewing from anywhere on the ship. So there was a big rush of people to go in that front part, which is really cool, but really speaking, anywhere on the ship, you will not miss anything in those scenic days.
Yeah, the scenic days were really nice, and it made it a lot more comfortable, especially for me, and I'm assuming a lot of other guests, where they can view the spectacular views of all the mountains and even the wildlife that we got to see.
Yeah, and it's another thing that they did is, like, we did Glacier Bay National Park, and they did have park rangers actually come in and narrate. So they did have really good narration as far as any of those scenic days where you'd learn a lot about it, and they'd also point out if anybody spotted wildlife, they'd let you know where to look. So it was a really good experience as far as, them keeping you informed of what's going on the ship.
They did a really good job explaining that as well. Being very detailed as to what rock to look at and how many paces to the left or to the right, even up or down, you should go in order to see it. So they definitely are experienced when it comes to locating these things and or these animals and guiding you through these steps to view these animals.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They, specifically in this setting on Alaska, you can tell that as far as that's concerned, they know what they're doing, and they really cater to the experience for the guests when it comes to that.
Yeah, that was a nice touch.
And then the other thing that we did find on the ship is it's very traditional as far as like the entertainment. They have a very traditional style theater, which is really nice. They have the private boxes that you can rent on the sides, kind of what you'd see in the more classic English style of entertainment. The same goes for their shows. It's very traditional. They have a lot of ballroom dancing and stuff that's catered more towards that older, more traditional, rich heritage of like the British cruise lines.
Yeah, I would say the only caveat as to those box rooms are the curved glass.
Yes, I would agree with that. It is cool to have a box in the theater, but they do have glass there, which is obviously there for safety reasons, but it does affect your viewing of the shows. So keep that in mind if you're going to spend the money and book one of those boxes.
Yeah.
I think that covers most of it. Okay, one more point that we have is the room service and is included. So that's really nice then, and it is throughout the entire day. So if it's like 2 a.m. in the morning and you want something to eat, you can get that through room service, which I know a lot of other cruise lines you have to pay extra on that. And the other point is they do have a guest laundry that you do not have to pay for, which is really nice on the longer cruise itineraries where it's 10 days or so. You can do laundry on the ship without having to pay extra for that.
Yeah. If you do choose to pay for laundry, keep in mind that it does take about 2 days for them to get it back. So if there is something specific you were wanting to wear on a specific day, just be mindful that it might take 2 days or up to 2 days to get your laundry back. They say 2 to 3 days at most.
Well, all right. So that covers most of what we liked on the ship. There are a couple of drawbacks that we've experienced so far as the ship itself. Typically, I have cruised on MSC and I've cruised on Royal Caribbean before this, and their staff on both of those were more friendly than what we've experienced as a whole on this ship. Now, there are certain people that have done a very good job as far as being friendly, like our room attendant has been great, and there are people that we've met throughout the ship that have done a good job, but as a whole, the staff is not quite as friendly as what you would expect and what we have experienced on other cruise lines.
Yeah, there was definitely some employees that even emphasized the fact that other employees weren't as friendly, or in some cases they would speak other languages and they would emphasize for them to not speak other languages. So there is some good employees, some bad employees, so just be mindful of that.
Yeah, and one of the other really big drawbacks we found is the Wi-Fi is absolutely terrible. Like,
yes.
we have had a really hard time in general connecting. Web pages will take several minutes to load, and again, this is something that is different from what I've experienced on other cruise lines. Typically their Wi-Fi has been really quick, and it's not as quick as your home connection, but it's for what you'd expect being on a ship. It's manageable. You can do your work and you can watch some stuff, but on their Wi-Fi, it is, if it works, it's pretty much for like texting only. Like, you cannot really do a whole lot more with it.
Yeah, and should you have bad Wi-Fi, you can always call the purser's office and they will refund you for the day, especially if it's some major inconvenience with your work or some other line of work that you do. It really depends, but they're pretty gracious, and they offer daily refunds for days that the Wi-Fi does not work. So
yeah, that was definitely a bonus. Obviously, it doesn't help you get what you needed done, but it at least makes it that you're not paying that much. And just another point, we did pay for the premium Wi-Fi, which it's not that we went on a lower tier. So it is something to just keep in mind, that the Wi-Fi is not great.
yeah, especially since they advertise that the premium Wi-Fi has faster speeds than the general Wi-Fi, but that didn't seem to be the case.
Yeah. So I would hate to see what the speeds on the general Wi-Fi are. The other thing that we found is that they do not have an app, and that's something that we kind of have grown accustomed to with other cruise lines, is everybody has an app that you can use that has really good and up-to-date information, where Cunard does not have an app. So they have their website that you have to go to, which before you cruise is mycunard.cunard.com, but once you're on the ship, it changes to myvoyage.cunard.com, which nobody told us about. So that's something that we just had to figure out, and the information is kind of what you'd expect from a web page. It's not as easy as an app. Like, just a simple thing of, there isn't an easy way to see on their page what the ship's time is. Or like their daily planner for events is literally like the PDF of the printed version they give you, and it doesn't even load most of the time. So it's not something where you can scroll through, easily book things, or work with it like an app that you'd expect from the other cruise lines.
Yeah. If it's one thing I would like to see from Cunard, is definitely integrate more technology. It can still be a very traditional ship, but upgrading technology is not only beneficial to Cunard and their future customers, but to their current customers, where they can easily access the logistical side of things when it comes to daily programs, what type of meals they'll be having. It's definitely something that can be definitely beneficial to them.
Yeah, I agree to that. They can still stick to having the paper, like what a lot of their people are accustomed to, but they should definitely have the more modern back end. And the other thing that we did find is also their My Voyage section only worked if you were on the ship's Wi-Fi. So let's say if you went into a port and you needed to know what time your all aboard time was, you wouldn't be able to access that page and see that information when you're not on the ship's Wi-Fi.
Mm-hmm.
Another point that we'd like to just bring up is, in general, their hours of operation for the various amenities on the ship are not very good. Typically, everything as far as the swimming pool, the spa, the outside decks operate from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., which I think in this itinerary, specifically in Alaska, is not very great, because your hours of the day, your sunrise is at, like, some of the days was as early as like 4:30 in the morning, and your sunset's like 9:40 in the evening.
Yeah, especially considering Cunard is oriented more towards an elderly. From an elderly's perspective, people tend to wake up more earlier, which a lot of these things and a lot of these amenities are closed a lot early, especially for people that want to go to the gym and start their day early. It's kind of inconvenient for the gym to open up at 8 a.m. especially for someone who is used to going to the gym at 5 a.m., as well as the spa or any other of these amenities.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And also with some of our port calls, I mean, some of the port calls, we got to the port at 6 a.m. in the morning. So if you wanted to plan your day and get off the ship and you want to get a workout in, there's no way you could go to the gym before getting off the ship. And by the time you get back on in the afternoon and you go to dinner and you're done with that, you cannot go to do anything in the evening because it's already closed with those hours.
Yeah, I would say for people who are very strict and disciplined with their day-to-day routine, it's not too flexible when it comes to your routine. You're going to have to change a few things and plan accordingly, especially if you're a gym fanatic or whatever you are. Another thing that's a little bit irritating is sometimes they get to the port earlier, but you're only allowed to get off of the ship at a certain time, and that's what I found a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, like on our one day, we got to port according to their daily planner. We were in port at 5 a.m., but they only opened the gangway at like 7:15. So we got up early and we were ready to get off the ship at 5. But even though we were in port, we couldn't get off the ship for another like 2 hours and 15 minutes of time, which obviously we could have spent sleeping or doing something else at that time instead of planning based on what they gave us on their daily planner.
Yeah, had we known that, we could have gotten more rest or maybe use that time to go to the gym. But wait, it opens up at 8.
Yeah, so. It wouldn't have been open. The other thing is, even though they do have heated pools and they do have hot tubs on the ship, the only hot tub that is actually a decent size is within their spa area, which again is confined to those hours, and you have to pay to use that thermal suite area of the spa. The other hot tubs, if it was Abe and I sitting in the hot tub, between the two of us, it would be cramped. Yep. Like they are very, very small on their hot tubs.
Yeah, so that's one thing to consider if you do decide to go on Cunard and hot tubs are something that you are into. Expect paying additionally for a better sized hot tub, and it's not a pretty penny. If you're looking at it for the entire trip, you're looking at about $229 per person. You could get a day pass for about $59 or a 2-hour pass for, I believe, $35.
Yeah, I think it was $35.
They do give you that $40 off coupon. It's only good for one-time use. So do with that as you will. But if that's something you're into, just be cautious of the hot tubs.
Yeah. And then finally, one of the other things that we noticed on the ship is just, especially going to Alaska where it's more of a scenic cruising venue, the windows on the ship have not been that clean, and it was like that on day one when we left Vancouver. So it's not something that has accumulated over the duration of the voyage. It's the windows were dirty when we got on the ship, and that's really something that I was kind of disappointed with. You know, we booked ocean view cabins on this specific cruise so we could still at least see the stuff, but I didn't even waste time trying to take a picture out of the window because it just wouldn't work. It was way too dirty.
Especially for people who were excited to film maybe a time lapse out of their window. Be cautious that the windows were dirty. I was hoping to see them clean it maybe during a few port stops, because obviously the salt water, once it dries up a little bit on there, forms that crusty layer. So I was a little bit disappointed with that as well. I wish they would have cleaned the windows a little better, especially when it came to not only filming or taking pictures, even viewing with your binoculars out the window formed a little bit of a obstruction as well.
Yeah, no, it would have definitely been nice if they at least just put in that little bit of extra effort and, you know, even clean the windows at one port stop, or at least have them cleaned before the ship leaves, because we're probably sitting with several weeks worth of build-up on the windows when we got onto the ship. Yeah,
of course. Now, all these things can be said with a grain of salt. Everyone has their different opinions on a ship and what they expect out of a cruise ship. These are just our opinions on things that we thought were some pros, some cons. Obviously, it's still a very great ship. It's a very beautiful ship. Some things are good, some things are bad, just like the food. But maybe that's something we can get into.
We'll definitely get into the food, but we want to make sure that we're given an honest review. We don't come in onto the ship. We watched a lot of other videos of people talking about it, and it doesn't necessarily match what we've experienced. So we take it with a grain of salt, but also understand that this is our honest opinion and what we experienced. We're not trying to sugarcoat anything. We're just trying to give you good feedback on how our cruise went.
Yeah, took the words right out of my mouth.
So let's look at our next category now, the food. before this cruise, we did a lot of research to see, what to expect on the food side of things, and everybody was saying that the food on Cunard is really good, and that's something that I would beg to differ on. Now, just to put it out there, we went to the buffet, and we had food primarily in the Britannia or their main dine-in section. Between that and the buffet, we were not in the class where we had the Princess Grill or the Queen's Grill. Those are typically for your suites and people that have traveled a lot more. And we did not try the specialty dine-in, and you'll understand why once we get into what we've experienced on the rest of the food.
Yeah.
And another thing we mentioned the general ship section, but the room service is included in that. So that is a nice thing to keep in mind, that you can order room service any time of the day. The menu will change depending on the hours, but it is available throughout the entire day.
Yeah.
Guess we'll start off with the main dining. The menu for a British ship, and we're all English speaking, and one member of our group is an English teacher, but the menu is not very good when you look at how they explain things, and there's a lot of words in their descriptions that doesn't really make sense, or you'd have to be able to speak like 3 or 4 different languages to understand what they actually have listed on their menu.
Yeah, one thing I wish they would have done better is explaining the dish in the subcategory of the dish. All they do is tell you is the ingredients in the dish. They don't really go about to tell you whether it is inspired from or what it consists of truly. Some things aren't that clear as far as explaining what it consists of.
Yeah, I would agree. They give you pretty much a name and an ingredients list, and for something to make the ingredients list, it does not necessarily have to be a part of the dish. It could be a little blob of something off to the side, and it will still be listed there. So it's really hard to gauge what you're actually going to get.
That carries on through the buffet as well. Some things were labeled inaccurately as far as what they were advertising it is, and even what it tasted like at some points.
Yeah, I do remember we had a peanut butter muffin with no peanut butter.
Yep. Also, I believe the peanut butter tasted like banana at some points, and vice versa. So, for those of you who have peanut allergies, proceed with caution.
I would agree to that, especially given that the lemon pastry was all peanut butter. So that just, in my opinion, that's kind of sloppy. That doesn't really talk to the quality side of things, but you would think that they would at least label the stuff clearly and make it clear as to what you're eating, and not play a guessing game when you take your first bite to see if you actually got what you thought you did. Yep. Generally on the main dining, the quality, like we had an oxtail soup which pretty much tasted like beef broth with like a couple of tiny, and I mean tiny, pieces of meat in there. It's not something that I would really say you'd expect as a oxtail soup.
No. For that matter, a lot of things on the menu, the quality wasn't really there. When it came to the sauces, when it came to even the quality of meat, as someone who cooks a lot with beef, I noticed some quality of the beef has been a little more poor. On a ship of this caliber, I was expecting to at least have some sort of prime grade beef. Maybe that was true on some dishes, but for the most part, I noticed choice, or maybe even choice select. So,
yeah, I would agree with that. And then there's just different things that are not like what you'd expect. Like they had a shrimp cocktail appetizer, which kind of came as like a blob of cut up shrimp on a plate, not what you'd expect a shrimp cocktail to be. And we ended up actually, for most of the nights, aside from the first, we would order multiple entrees just to kind of hedge our bets that we'd actually get something that's good. Yeah. And that's not something you really want to be doing when you're on a cruise, expecting the food quality to be better.
Yeah, because then they look at you like you're some fat blob that's ordering the entire menu, but you're just trying to get at least something decent to eat.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we did get several judgmental looks from the staff when they, take your order and you're ordering 3 items from the menu.
Yeah, but I mean, you if you were in our shoes, you would understand because by the time they got the food to us, it took a while. So we got even more hungry, which is another thing that was a bit frustrating, was the consistency and timing when it came to serving us our food.
Yeah, especially we had breakfast in the main dine-in the one day, and I want to say it took an hour and a half,
Yeah.
maybe slightly longer for us to actually get our food.
Yeah, that was a little bit annoying, especially the fact that as you are on a ship, there's other plans that you have, or maybe it stopped in a port and they are delaying the process of your trip.
Yeah, and on our buffet as well, they have like, obviously it's a buffet, but you have the sections where they could make an omelet or something like that, and it took a really long time if you wanted an omelet. Like, they only had 1 or 2 people making them for an entire buffet. Same thing goes for their pancakes and waffles. They had a pancake griddle that was probably about that big for the entire buffet. So there were never any pancakes. They were always out. Same with the waffles. There's like a 4 waffle iron to serve an entire buffet.
Yeah.
So
I think the main thing I've noticed was probably just a lack of consistency, whether it's the lack of, not lack actually, surplus of syrup in the cranberry or apple juice, which if you plan to bring your kids here, just take a mental note of that, otherwise they'll be running up the walls. When it came time to the timing and even the quality of food, some food wasn't bad though. There were dishes that had very good taste, like tonight the beef Wellington was absolutely amazing. So was the barbecue smoked salmon. That was really good.
yeah, I would agree with that. It's just you're hesitant on your dinner because you don't know if it's going to be a hit night or a miss night.
Yeah.
And that leads into part of why we did not try the specialty dining. And to me, I would try it if our general food was good, to see what the next level would be. But with it being that inconsistent on their general food, it really didn't give me any level of confidence to want to go out and spend additional for specialty dining that might end up being a miss, and then you have the same experience and now you've spent a lot of extra money just to get something mediocre.
Yeah, exactly. And especially a ship, like I was saying before, of this caliber, you would expect to have some decent food, and in hopes that it would encourage you to try some of the alternative dining options on board as well. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and there's just, smaller attention to detail things as well. Like on their buffet, they have their industrial toasters that take 2 rounds to toast a bagel. So it's something that, you can toast at home in a matter of a minute and a half, but when you're on a ship and you want a toasted bagel, you got to wait for 5 minutes for it to go through a toaster. And those just inconsistencies is not something that you'd expect. And that's, again, coming from trying other cruise lines to seeing the experience. Yeah, I will say that in my opinion, I do not think Cunard holds a candle to Royal Caribbean. Even in that matter, MSC was not as good as what I'd say Royal Caribbean was, but they were definitely a step higher on the food quality than what I would say we've experienced on this ship.
Yeah, I agree. I think Cunard definitely needs to step up their game when it comes to food, as far as understanding the menu, what is in the menu, and to this extent, what it's going to taste like, because we had lemon that tasted like peanut butter and peanut butter that tasted like banana. So there was a few different things that were going on. So they could definitely either change their main chefs, or at least order some higher quality food. Especially not from Canada, Costco.
I agree with that. The other thing that I will say is just there's a bit of inconsistency as far as what's included. So in our main restaurant, if you ate there or at the buffet, you'd have your tea and your coffee and your fruit juices. But if we went to the Golden Lion, if you wanted to order coffee at the pub, it would be an extra charge to get a coffee that would be included at one of the other venues. So it's really inconsistent from what to expect with that. And that being said, the pub, that I would say is probably the best lunch that we had on the ship. Their fish and chips was good. Chicken tikka masala was good. The pies were good.
Burgers were amazing.
Burgers were good. So that was I wish we did that on day one.
Yeah. So for any of you guys out there that are on the ship currently watching this video, or a few days out from being on this ship, try every single restaurant that's within your category on day one. Don't wait till the last day because you will regret it. Another thing to note is the timing of when these dinings open, or alternative dining restaurants open, and when they close. Oftentimes we'd find ourselves nibbling away at some finger foods, whether it's at tea time or somewhere that was open where we can get food. It just seemed that some of the timing was a little bit inconvenient as far as getting food.
I would agree with that. And to quote one of the people on the trip with us, 2:30 is a normal time to want to have lunch, and that's when they ended their lunch hours in a lot of the restaurants. So if you're used to having a little bit of a later lunch, you'd kind of be in that awkward gap between 2:30 and like 5-6 p.m. when the dinner seating started. So that's just something to keep in mind with the excursions and when you get back, that there may not always be good food options open at any time of the day.
Yeah. So definitely a lot to consider in the food department, but you cannot go wrong with Golden Lion. They have some really good fried cod.
I would agree with that. So one last thing on the food side of things is there aren't really a lot of specialty dining options on the ship. So there's only 2 specialty dining restaurants. One's the Veranda, and then they have a separate section of the buffet that you can do as like a specialty dining, but other ships do have a lot more options than what we've seen over here. And the other side of it is we've spoken to other passengers on the ship that have dined in some of the higher restaurants like the Princess Grill, the Queen's Grill, and some of them have said that they have found that the food does tend to get to a better quality point at those other higher options. So they recommended if you're booking to book on one of those other tiers that you'd get better food.
Yeah.
But we did also have a mixed review from some other people that said that they've been cruising with Cunard for several years, and they believe that the quality even on the higher tier restaurants like the Queen's Grill and the Princess Grill has come down a little bit from what it used to be previously.
Yeah. I think it depends also on where your standard of food in general is. If your standard is very low, then I believe the food will be mediocre at best. If you're having a normal standard on the food, then you'll be disappointed at times. There's some days it's good, but with a normal standard, you would expect to see more alternative options when it comes to the dining or specialty diners.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say probably on our trip, it was probably like a 35-65 split of 35% of the time we had good food, and the rest was kind of mediocre, below average.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the cabins on the ship now. So we found our cabin, the beds were really comfortable. I know that's something that's kind of hit or miss, but overall from all of us, we did find that the beds were comfortable. The room, I would say, is a good size for a cruise ship.
It's very good.
It's definitely a nice, comfortable size. You're not like tripping all over yourself.
Even with the storage, the room being a bigger room size, especially for a ship, you have a lot of storage opportunities when it comes for storage under the bed or in the cabinetry. So your suitcases go right under the bed, everything fits. There's also some storage underneath the bed, some pull out drawers. So the storage was really awesome in the rooms.
Yeah, I would agree. And there is a lot of hanging space. That's what I did find on this compared to other ships, is there's a lot of hanging space. The only downside to that is there's a little bit less shelving space than what I've seen on other ships. But with the suitcases under the bed, the beds on this did sit slightly higher than what I've seen on other ships. So your bags slide in a little bit easier. On that.
Even with the suitcases in, especially if you have suitcases that fit one into another, I found that there's still a considerable amount of room underneath the bed. And especially also if you have those metal magnetic hooks that you put on the wall, that's additional storage. So storage is not an issue when it comes to the rooms at all.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we are well, we're on a 10-night itinerary, so we had enough stuff packed with us, and with Alaska bringing extra jackets and all that stuff, we did not have a shortage of storage, which was really nice.
Yep. Just make sure you bring those magnetic hooks.
Yes, those are definitely a game changer. One of the other things that we did realize is they do have a hairdryer that's included in the room, but it is a very bad hairdryer. Like, if your normal time to dry your hair is 5 minutes, plan on 15 minutes. Like, it's to that level of how bad the hairdryer is.
Yep. So if you could somehow get a hairdryer on board, please bring one. Make sure it's not surge protected, and you shouldn't have a problem, hopefully.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll mention is the bathroom itself. The layout is not bad as far as the space and that, but the shower is a little on the small side, I would say, compared to some of the other ships. And I noticed that the shower head is a little bit lower. So for the taller guys, like we're both over 6 foot, it is a little bit more difficult to shower, just having to bend down to wash your head.
Yep.
And they do have shower curtains, which is different from what we've seen on other lines that have moved more to having like a glass or a different kind of design on that.
I wish the curtain was a tad bit longer. It seems that it was a little bit too short, so definitely prepare for water to splatter into the bathroom unless you're angling that shower head away from it. But even then, when you're washing your hair and just washing in a shower for that matter, water will get all over the place, and prepare for that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Where the curtain is not to the length that it will fall inside the shower pan, so it can easily swing over and put that water out into the rest of the bathroom.
Yeah. Well, that being said, the temperature is great. It gets way above hot. They have a lock setting, but they have a little lever that you can bypass that and make it even hotter, which for someone like me, I like very hot showers. The pressure is also, from what my experience, very good.
And the other thing is that temperature, or the showers itself, when you turn it on, there isn't a lot of lag time between getting the temperature of water that you set it to. It's almost instant having that heat come out of the shower, which is really nice.
Yeah, I would say no more than 5 seconds, and it's at the temperature that you desire.
Yeah, it was that's a definite bonus on that side.
Yeah.
And they do also include body wash and shampoo as part of what they give you in the shower. There is not conditioner, so pack accordingly, but their body wash and shampoo is included, and it's pretty good from what I found.
I would say it's also enough for a 10-day cruise. It's not those little travel-size bottles that you're familiar with in hotels. These are full-size bottles, and they also smell good. They don't smell like very old dish soap or very old grandma perfumes. So they smell really good.
I would agree with that. And if you do, for some reason, run out, they'll refill them. So your room attendant will take care of that.
Yeah. Speaking of room attendants.
Yeah.
Really good.
We had a very good room attendant. Our rooms are 2 down from each other, so we had the same attendant. And I mean, he, from my opinion, is the best server or best employee that we've come across on the ship so far. Like, he is really good at what he does. The rooms are really well taken care of. He's friendly, really willing to help us with whatever questions we have or anything like that. So
he also takes mental note of who's leaving, who's coming. During my whole trip, for me and my wife, we did not find a time where we crossed each other's path, where he's in the room and we have to come back later. So it was a very pleasant experience. So that way, when we had a long day of hiking or whatever excursions we had planned that day, everything was back to order with 2 little very good chocolates on the bed, and he did a really fantastic job.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He's definitely probably the best room attendant I've had on any cruise that I've been on. The other thing that I'd mention is there is a fridge in the room, which is always helpful. It's nice to have something on there. And they do give you a small bottle of champagne with some glasses in your fridge when you get on. The other thing that's nice in these rooms is that they have the coffee pot and that, so you can make tea
Yeah.
and coffee in your room, which is really cool.
Yeah, that one was really nice. Also, complimentary sparkling champagne, I believe, or sparkling wine in the fridge. One thing I did not like about the fridge was the shelf space was a little bit small, so pouches would tend to fit better in there, but water bottles would not fit in a door shelf. But still, decent space in the fridge, especially for a cruise ship, I would say.
Yeah, it's not bad as far as what I'd expect for a cruise
Yeah.
ship, and it does actually get cold. So there's a lot of
Yes.
fridges that I've seen on cruise ships where it doesn't get very cold, but these ones do actually make the water pretty cold.
Yep. Speaking of temperature, the climate control in the room is fairly simple. There's just one knob. It gets plenty cold, plenty warm. No need to worry as to guys if it's too hot, or for women if it's too cold. So you're good in that department as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then this cruise line does also have, when you enter your cabin by the door, there's a place where you put in your key card, which will leave all the lights and everything turned on in the cabin. They do have a little card which you would put in your door, which lets the room service or the room attendant know if you're requesting service or if you want privacy. You can put that into that card slot to leave everything on if you don't want to put your actual cruise card in. And a business card will also work. So that way, if you're just heading out of your room quickly and you want everything to stay on, you don't have to actually leave your ship's card in that slot for the room to still, keep everything running.
One thing I want to mention about the bathroom, going off on a little tangent here, I did not notice there was a fan in the bathroom, which could be useful on a ship.
Yeah, there is no extractor fan, but in all fairness, I have not seen an extractor fan in a bathroom on any other cruise line that I've been on, so I don't think that is normal practice that they have them in there. Overall, on the bedrooms, we did have a positive experience, and I would say that the bedroom as a whole is on the better side from what I've seen in cruise ships, but there are still a few drawbacks.
Yeah.
The plugs,
Yeah, the plugs, there weren't many. There were 4 that you can use, 4 US plugs for that matter. Do not expect any plugs by the bed. There is one behind the nightstand, which is very difficult to get to. The only ones that you'll find are near the desk or right behind the coffee maker for the US and non-US plugs. One thing we did was bring a no surge protected extension block where we can plug in multiple devices. Another thing I'd recommend is those 10-foot charging cables that everyone seems to not like, but is extremely convenient. I would bring it on board because you can definitely use a few of those.
yeah, it's especially if you like to have something next to the bed, or if you're watching something on a phone or an iPad, there's no easy way to have it on charge close to the bed. It has to stay on the desk. Now, given with how terrible the Wi-Fi is, that's probably not a problem if you're trying to stream something, because it's not going to work.
Exactly. So lack of battery is not an issue on the ship. For the Wi-Fi, it doesn't seem to work half the time. So, but one thing I did notice was the times where Wi-Fi did work was the time that you also had cell reception. So there was no point to use the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Their Wi-Fi only seemed to work when they were close enough to land to not need Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Let's take a look now at why we chose this specific cruise to go to Alaska. So part of the reasoning was this one had a good itinerary. It was a round trip where we left from Vancouver and returned to Vancouver. And our stops were Ketchikan, Sitka, the Hubbard Glacier, Juneau, Skagway, Glacier Bay, which this is one of the few ships and lines that has a permit to go into Glacier Bay. And then we went to Victoria, returning back to Vancouver. So 10-night itinerary, and it is a round trip, which made it a lot easier on our flights going in and out of Vancouver instead of having to do separate flights as a one-way cruise, which a lot of the other lines are doing.
Yeah. I must say this itinerary was definitely the selling point. Spectacular views, especially the glaciers. One of the glaciers, the captains did a very good job maneuvering the ship in and out of the ice, and were able to get us about a mile away from the glacier itself. which was something that is a unforgettable experience, I must say.
I would definitely agree with that. And that, again, was one of our selling points with it being a smaller ship. It had the ability to enter into a lot of those areas and get us close to that. And we were also not affected by the rock slide in Skagway because, again, a smaller ship, so we could still get in there and dock, where a lot of the bigger ships had to have their itineraries changed as a result of that.
Yeah.
Then our next thing that we looked at is our port stops were fairly long on the ship. Now, granted, Cunard are not very good at displaying before the cruise how long you're going to have in each port, but we were pleasantly surprised with significant, amount of time at each stop to enjoy what each place had to offer. So that was a good point. They could do with a lot more transparency on what that would look like before you get on the ship, and not only find out on your initial paperwork and then the day-by-day itineraries.
Yeah, definitely communication as far as when we are able to get off the ship at these ports and get back on the ship could have been communicated a little more effectively.
Yeah, and just on that same point, the times that they gave us were sort of conflicting. So when we boarded on the first day, they gave us like a general cruise paperwork, which gave us, the time slots that we were expected at each port, and that did change from day to day. So when we got our daily planner paperwork the night before, the time that they gave us was different from what they gave us when we initially set sail. So they definitely need better communication from that side and consistency.
Yeah, especially when it comes to disembarkation, whatnot. Even some things on the ship, like the gala nights, that's something they could have communicated a little bit better as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And they, from our experience with other cruise lines, they're not very clear when you get on and off the ship about, when you need to be back. Like on Royal Caribbean, when we went there, every person that you encounter on your way out will make sure that you know what the ship time is. They make sure that you know that the all aboard time is, whatever it may be for that day, and that you can plan accordingly to be back on the ship by that time, where we did not have that on this cruise. You just kind of get off and you have to make sure that you have it on your own to get back. And with the way that they didn't have an app and you had to log into that My Voyage webpage, which you could not access when you're off the cruise Wi-Fi, it made it really difficult to know that. So you'd either have to take your daily paperwork with you so you could know what that time was, or you'd have to take a screenshot or something to make sure that you could be back on the ship at the same time, at the correct time that you should be, and know what the ship's time actually is.
Yeah, so if you do consider on sailing on the ship, make sure you factor in these things. That way you can better prepare yourself for these activities that you do. Or if you choose not to go and you just stay on the ship, then you won't have a problem at all.
Well, and also, we try to plan everything really well before going on the cruise, and it was really difficult to make those plans and to book excursions, especially if you're trying to book it not through the cruise line, when you don't have a clear arrival time and departure time out of the ports before you set sail. So I'm not sure why they do not give that information, but a lot of the other cruise lines do. Your Royal Caribbeans, that you'd know months in advance when you'll get to a port and when you'll leave, so you can plan accordingly, where it was difficult to do that with Cunard, because they would just say you get in early and you leave late, or it was very vague, especially before the cruise.
Yeah, and it doesn't make it any easier when it's not clear on what time you can leave the ship. Also, when you factor in the delay of the food, all these things, it kind of adds up and adds to the stress. So Cunard being better prepared for when we leave, and just from a logistical standpoint, I would have liked to see that a little more from Cunard, I would say.
I would agree with that. And then also just little attention to detail things, like the map on the TV. We turned on our TV and it shows you a cruise tracker of where the ship is. And there were several days where it showed us a map of a completely different region of the world, and it didn't have any of the details from our ship. So it's really hard to see where we actually are and kind of plan where you're going to go out on the deck and view different things when the map that they provide isn't even accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The other thing that we found was, before our cruise, we called Cunard customer service several times to, ask questions about what the itinerary would be like, if we would actually be going through the inside passage, and information about our cruise, and they were not knowledgeable to answer any of those questions. We only found out that the cruise was actually going on the inside passage when we got our first day's daily planner, and we saw it on the paperwork when we got on the ship, and the captain spoke about it, saying that we would be cruising through that section. That was the first time that we actually knew for certain that it was going on the inside passage. Nobody on their website or on their customer service, when we spoke to them, were able to give us that information before actually being on the ship.
Yeah, even finding out that we were cruising through the inside passage during nighttime, which made it a little bit inconvenient, especially for the spectacular views. It just seemed like it was a waste of those views.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we left later in the afternoon. We probably only left out of Vancouver, I think it was around like 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And a lot of that initial piece was going through that first part of the inside passage. But by the next morning when we woke up, we were already on the track up through most of that area. So even though we did technically cruise the inside passage, a lot of it was through the night where you couldn't really sit out and see anything. I know the nights are shorter, but we still cleared a lot of that scenic area in nighttime hours.
Yeah, so definitely knowledge of the crew would have helped with that, especially with certain departments. One thing that I had an issue with was them being knowledgeable as far as what to do with insurance, which I will get into a little bit. My wife wasn't feeling too well, so we went to the medical center. We weren't sure how to proceed with the insurance or how our travel insurance will factor in. Their staff didn't know, which they repeatedly told me on the phone they don't know how to go about it, which was a little bit frustrating because I had to find things out on my own. Another thing I did find very irritating was the hours of the medical center. They, even though it displays on their website that they're open from, I believe, 6 to 8 or 8 to 6, they are closed from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., which is a big chunk of the day, which we found very inconvenient because that was a time that my wife was in a little bit of pain. So a few things to factor in there. If you are in pain, you could still go, but be expected to pay additional cost as their hours are altered and they're closed during that time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the insurance side of it, when we booked, the travel insurance was an option that we booked with Cunard. So it wasn't a third-party insurance that we got out on our own. It was travel insurance through the cruise line themselves. So it's really disappointing that they would not be able to give any more insider information, since they were the provider who sold the insurance on it.
Exactly. I would have liked to know more information. Just like you said, you hit the nail on the head there. Especially the fact that they sold us this insurance.
Yeah, and then the timing on the medical center, like Abe mentioned, is kind of inconvenient. Also, when you factor in that you have a set dinner time and there's a lot of other activities that you may be wanting to do during the day, for them to be unavailable for that large chunk of time right in the middle of the day makes it difficult. And like he said, you were still able to book, but then it was like a more like emergency type of booking where they would charge you extra to see you.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we're in the situation where we took the insurance, but if you're not in that situation, you could be paying double for the same level of care, or you'd have to wait for several hours.
Yeah, well, which is kind of brings me to my next point. If you are considering on getting the travel insurance, I highly recommend it. There's things that can be unexpected. You don't know. Maybe it's something in the food that will give you food poisoning. So it definitely paid off for my wife and I highly recommend it for any of you who are considering it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then one of the other things that we did realize is they're not very clear about when the time changes. There was only one person throughout the whole trip. It was one of the waiters that told us that there was a time change that evening. But nowhere else in the planner do they mention that the time will change. So it's kind of difficult to plan your day, and set your alarm clocks and everything when you don't really know when you're going through that time change. And from our experience being on Royal Caribbean, They're very clear on their announcements, they're clear on their planners, they're clear on their app. Whenever there's a time change that you need to know about, they make sure that it's well communicated to the guests, which is kind of, that's something important, especially when you have plans, excursions, things that you need to get to make sure that you can get there at the correct time.
Yeah, that's a good point. But even if they were to put it on their website, what good is it if you can't even access it through the Wi-Fi?
Yeah. And same thing with their My Cunard page. They do not have something that says, hey, this is the ship's time.
Yeah.
Like if you want to know the ship's time and you cannot do it on that page, you have to turn on your TV in your room or find a clock on the ship to know what the ship's time is.
Yeah.
So it would be a lot easier if they had a convenient way to actually look that up.
Yeah, even if it wasn't for the Wi-Fi, at least some kind of little note, maybe in the cabins, a part of the daily program that says, hey, just to let you know, the time is changing, going up 1 hour, you're increasing or decreasing 1 hour. That way you can better prepare your trip or your day as it comes.
Yeah. And then finally, before we booked the cruise, we spoke to our travel agent, and we've done a lot of research on the cruise line, and we fully expected that there would be an older group of people. Us being some of the youngest people on the ship, there are very few kids. If you do have kids, it's really, from what I've seen, not tailored to having children on the ship. They do have some kids activities, but
they have a play zone and enough to keep them distracted for, I would say, a few days.
Yeah, but they would probably not have a lot of friends or meet a lot of other kids. We've seen very few on the ship, so it's just something to keep in mind. Typically, even the staff said the average age is probably over 60, so it's a lot of what we were expecting was older and more on the retired side, especially British people, because they're very loyal to their cruise line. What we were not expecting was there were a lot of people from other nationalities that were not necessarily accustomed to what we would say are Western norms. So just being more respectful. Typically, if you're standing viewing somewhere and you're taking pictures, most people will either offer to take a picture for you or make sure that they're not in your shot, where we encountered a lot of people that would just walk into your shot, they take their selfie stick it right next to you. There was a point where one person went between us and pointed
asked us to move.
Yeah. us to, like, not even asking, just kind of pointed, like, move out the way so we can take a picture, which that's not something that we were really expecting on the ship. And even with the elevators, I mean, typical elevator etiquette is you get to a floor, the people that exit the elevator exit, and then people get on. You wouldn't think that's rocket science, but the amount of times that we were trying to exit an elevator and there was a rush of people just trying to get onto that same elevator before we could get off was kind of crazy.
Yeah, I was just expecting a bit more common decency from the people on board, but that seemed to fail me at times, as my wife can also attest to that. She was using a hair dryer and one lady just grabbed the hair dryer out of her hand and continued to use it. So it's definitely there's a few etiquettes on board that you need to have, and seeing that some people did not have it.
And especially given that it's typically an older crowd. Like, these are normally the people that
would show respect.
You would see respect and that kind of level of, like, higher class decency, but we haven't really seen that. And I mean, it can be said with just walking on the hallways, like, there's a giant group of people that would just stand blocking the entire hallway that you couldn't walk through. So those are things that we were really not expecting to see on this cruise.
Yeah, I would have expected a little more politeness, a little more respect out of these people that were inconsiderate. And if you are considering going on this cruise, just take that into consideration, the fact that there might be people that get in your way, point a selfie stick in the most randomest spots, or just simply point at you to tell you to move out of your spot so they can take a photo of themselves in your spot. So
well, and also
a lot of other things.
Yeah, like you're trying to take a picture and people will walk in front of you, walk between you and the camera, just get on top of you, like, no concept for personal space.
Exactly, yeah.
And that being said, a lot of it was we were in viewing areas, but we were at the back of the ship where there was plenty of open space. It's not like at the front where everybody was standing shoulder to shoulder. We were in an area where there's plenty of open space, but somebody will come and practically stand on top of you instead of standing 2 feet over with the exact same view. So those were things that were frustrating to us, and just also in general we were expecting a more older and quieter crowd, where a lot of those people were very loud when it came to sitting at the buffets or at the restaurants, and just in general where it's not what we were expecting.
Yeah, I must agree with that.
Thank you for watching. We really hope that this video was helpful to you and that you learned a lot. If you are planning on booking a cruise in Alaska, that this would really help you narrow down where you'd like to go and what cruise line you'd like to go with.
Yeah, overall I say it's a beautiful ship, very traditional ship. It's amazing. I would recommend it. Obviously take a grain of salt things we said. It might be different for different people, so go with this information as you will.
Yeah, and one more thing that I would just like to mention is, even though there were, significant cons to the ship, from what we saw in our research, this was one of the better looking ships to do the Alaska itineraries. There were a lot of other cruise lines that seemed to have their much older ships that didn't look as nice running these kind of routes. I would believe they do that just because they think the people are more interested in the itinerary and that they can get away with running an older ship on these routes. So it was still a good way to go about it for us to do this trip.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. Make sure to subscribe to my good friend Richard. Thank you for having me on, by the way. And he will also list somewhere, probably right here, the video of a full tour of this ship.
Thank you. We appreciate it and hope you enjoy the other videos that will be coming.